Hello and welcome back. Thanks for joining. My name is Berit and today I want to talk about Death's End by Cixin Liu. This is the third and last part of the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. So I'm going to give you a spoiler warning for the three-body problem and the Dark Forest because those are the first two volumes of the trilogy. So I have powered through this baby in a week, which means that I have spent quite a lot of time reading in the last 7 days. So in this novel, our protagonist is an aerospace engineer. Cheng Xin is her name. And she is working on the Staircase project, which it turns out was a project that was launched kind of parallel to the Wallfacer project in book 2, but it was not as well known as the Wallfacer project. And the Staircase project had the objective of sending a human into space in the direction of the Trisolaren fleet, to have a kind of diplomat or envoy who would establish a first direct contact with the alien invaders who were by that point in time still on their way to Earth. The Staircase project has a lot of difficulties that they have to think about. They have to think about how do we get a person who is willing to go on that mission, because that is pretty much a one-way ticket. Another problem is the question of how do we get the spaceship to be fast enough to actually reach the Trisolaren fleet on its way to Earth kind of early enough, because human space engineering, space travel isn't as well developed as it should be for that mission, basically. And if I remember correctly, the main hope of the Staircase project is pretty much to lower the level of hostility of the Trisolarans towards humans, because the basic information that we have from book 2 is that the Trisolarans are on their way to Earth to pretty much wipe out humanity, so humans are kind of trying to not let that happen, and that is one of the projects that are installed. But as I said, not as famous as the Wallfacer project, which is probably also kind of the explanation of why we don't get to know anything about the existence of the Staircase project throughout book 2, because that concentrates on the Wallfacer project. So yeah, our protagonist is an aerospace engineer, Cheng Xin, and she is working on the Staircase project, and we kind of see how the project develops, and we also get to read about some of the other stuff that happens in human history in the future. So when I first opened the book, I noticed that we have a reminder of some of the characters in the book, like Ye Wenjie, Yang Dong, who is Ye Wenjie's daughter, Ding Yi, who was Ye Wenjie's partner, and a few other people. And then we also have a table of eras, which kind of hints at how much is happening in the book and how much time this book covers. So we have the Common Era, which is the era that we would be living in. Then we have the Crisis Era, which is basically the era that in which the Dark Forest takes place. And then we also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other eras. So you just get a glimpse of how much is actually happening in this book. I will not even tell you more about the content. This is like just the beginning of the book is about the Staircase project and what it is and how they find a human, who they send to space and stuff like that, because afterwards so much is happening and I don't want to take away any of the discoveries that you will make while reading, because it's a lot, and I feel like this book could well have the subtitle "Now Shit Really Hits the Fan," because it does. So yeah, we're kind of already jumping to the opinions part of this video. One of the things that I really liked about this book is its pacing. I thought it was very well paced. There were several chapters where I thought, okay, I cannot stop reading now. So I had quite a few shorter nights last week. I thought that was really well done. As I said, I read this thing in 7 days and it has a little over 700 pages. So this is quite a long book, actually. Another thing about the book which I found very interesting has to do with the fact that a lot of it takes place in outer space. We are not on Earth very much, I would say. And the thing is that for me, the book captured this thought of the terror of space, or the feeling of the terror of outer space, very well, because one of the main things from book 2 that are also pretty important in book 3 is the whole dark forest theory. So this theory that the universe is pretty much like a dark forest, and whoever reveals their location in this dark forest becomes prey, because this dark forest is a hostile place. And that is very important also in book 3. And for me, this feeling of like the universe is a dark forest, it's a vast place with no boundaries, no up and down, and it's just, yeah, a vast dark space, and anything can attack you at any time. Kind of this whole feeling of we are just microbes in this universe. I thought that this feeling for me was captured very, very well by the book, and I loved that. It was terrifying and also terrifyingly interesting to read. Apart from the main story in the book, we also have a lot of chapters, especially in the first half, that are entitled An Excerpt from a Past Outside of Time, which also kind of help you to contextualize some of what is happening. I thought that was really helpful, otherwise I would have been very, very confused many times. And I thought that these excerpts from A Past Outside of Time also helped with the pacing, because it helped you understand the story, and so you could read on, and you had, at least I had, quite some aha moments where I thought, oh, okay, now I kind of get what this is about. And I also have to say, with the era table, before I started the book I was super confused, and I thought, well, okay, what am I reading now? What am I getting myself into? But as you read, you kind of understand the eras, and I thought that was really interesting. And I have to say, in a way, the book took a course that I hadn't expected before I started reading the book. After book 2, I wouldn't have thought that book 3 would take the course and also the scale of what it does, kind of. There are a few things that I didn't love about the book, but they were not major things, actually. I went into the book being kind of concerned about how this would go with regard to sexism, basically, because book 2 was really an eye-opener about that. And it wasn't as bad as I thought, but also the sexism here kind of went both ways, which was interesting. So we have the female protagonist, and I will give the novel big props for that, because I love that. I hadn't expected that. But there is a but, and I will mark this next section as a spoiler. Because Chang-Xin does make 2 major decisions for humanity, and both of them are bad. She makes bad decisions for humanity. In the end, it is kind of argued whether or not her decisions were actually bad, because the thing is that she makes both decisions in this kind of bad way because of her love for humanity, which is basically a positive thing. She wants to prevent war, basically, and she wants to prevent death, but unfortunately her decisions actually lead to a lot of death. I gotta say, the death count in this book is crazy if you think about it. The decision that she makes as the sword holder really annoyed me, because I was reading the chapter where she takes over the position. Like, I was so sure that the moment that she becomes the sword holder, Trisolarans would attack, the droplets would come. And as she was sitting there or standing there thinking about whether or not she should push the button, I was basically yelling at the book, push the button, do it, oh my god. And then she doesn't, and it really annoyed me. But I also thought, like, yeah, well, it's understandable if you're on page, like, what was it, 200, 250, and you know that you have a 700-page book. I thought, well, of course she's not going to push the button. And the thing is that she could have a lot of good reasons for not pushing this button to expose the location of Trisolaris to the universe. The thing that kind of annoyed me with it was that, as I understood it at least, the reason for her not pushing the button was pretty much the fact that she's a woman. Because shortly before she takes over as the sword holder, she kind of discovers her maternal instinct, because she holds a baby in her arms in front of the UN building, something like that, and then she's almost framed as like this Madonna kind of figure. And I thought it was interesting that humanity frames her as that, and that they see her as a kind of savior and etc. But it kind of annoyed me that I got the feeling that the main reason why she makes a bad decision is the fact that she's a woman. Like, give her another reason. There are other reasons that you can have to make bad decisions. It doesn't just have to be the fact that you're a woman. And for the second bad decision that she makes, which is the question of whether or not the Halo company should go more into research about curvature propulsion to achieve lightspeed travel, although it's forbidden, and they have this kind of, danger for war with the government. I thought it was, personally I thought, girl, they have to go into curvature propulsion, they have to. But I also found it kind of understandable that she wanted to prevent a major war, although with this decision as well as the other one, she kind of, it kind of led to very bad consequences for humans, but her intentions were okay. The fact that she has so much love for humanity that she kind of doesn't want humanity to die is a good intention. And I thought it was interesting that the book in the end problematizes this question of, well, is she guilty for pretty much the end of humanity in the solar system, as is her feeling when they kind of flee from the solar system, and she discovers that because of her decision, humanity has lost 35 years of research on curvature propulsion, that this kind of, makes her maybe guilty of humanity ending in the solar system. I thought it was interesting that that was problematized at the end. So the second decision, I was yelling at the book again, but it didn't annoy me as much as the first one, because in the first one I felt that the book was telling me that this happens because she's a woman. And with the second decision, I didn't feel like the book was suggesting that to me so much. But anyway, I was kind of, wasn't a fan of that, but I understood why it happened. Another thing that I want to address while we are on the subject of the kind of sexism part is that I found it interesting that in this book there is also quite some sexism about men, and I found that more disrupting in my reading than the two major bad decisions of Changqin, because other than that I thought it was not too bad when it comes to women, although there was, like, at least once there was the sentence, she was a woman, not a warrior, and I was like, well, a woman can be both, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. Anyway, there was also a kind of confusing sexism when it comes to men, I think, because when Changxin awakens in the deterrence era, she at first has trouble distinguishing men from women because men have become so feminized that she's confused by it. And it's pretty explicitly stated that she also thinks that this is not attractive and that the men from the common era, they are kind of like real masculine men. And I thought that was kind of confusing because in a way I thought, okay, well, it makes sense for a book to maybe tell me that humanity's appearance has changed over the centuries. That can happen. But why does it have to be so outspoken about calling men feminized and framing that as explicitly unattractive? I was wondering, why is that important for the story? Because it's not important to the story. I think at one point the book I felt that the book suggested that the men of the deterrence era kind of looked like K-pop idols, and that was very feminine and not very attractive and kind of like that. Like, the book doesn't say K-pop idols, of course, but there was a moment where I thought, like, this book kind of suggests that the men look a bit like K-pop idols do. And I was super confused by that because I thought it's not important to the story. Like, you can't tell me that men look like K-pop idols in this era, but why do you have to tell me that this is too feminine, this is unattractive? I was kind of confused by that. But I also found it kind of hilarious because it was so unimportant to the story for me. And I was like, don't give me that unnecessary information 5 times. I don't need it. And then later in the bunker era, the men again look more like the men from the common and crisis eras. And the book is very clear about that the men from the common era and the men from the bunker era are real men in opposition to the feminized men of the deterrence era. And I'm gonna read you the sentence that made me laugh out loud about this. The men who had disappeared during the deterrence era had returned. This was another age capable of producing men. Sexism is kind of a thing. It didn't annoy me as much as it did in the second book. I found it partly hilarious, and yeah, I had a better time coping with the things that kind of annoyed me than I had in the first 2 books, gotta say. Moving on from all of that, I also want to say which part of the book I enjoyed the most, and that was the parts that took place on the spaceships Gravity and Blue Space. We remember Blue Space and Bronze Age. They escaped the Doomsday Battle in book 2, so they were kind of framed as traitors to humanity. And in the 3rd book, we have a bit of the story taking place on Blue Space and Gravity. Gravity is a spaceship that hunts Blue Space, and they are also a huge antenna capable of broadcasting the location of Trisolaris to the universe, which is kind of important to the story. I thought that whole episode was ridiculously interesting, how they explore the 4th dimension and how the 4th dimension is described and everything. And likewise, you might think that I also loved the part where the solar system collapses into 2-dimensional space, and interestingly, I didn't. At first I did. It was super interesting to read how the sun enters 2-dimensional space. But I thought that was the one part of the story that dragged a tiny bit, because we get a lot of descriptions, which is understandable because we as humanity kind of lose our home, our whole solar system actually, in that phase. But since we also had the expedition to Pluto and the whole conversation with Luoji, and then you have the description of almost all the planets collapsing into two-dimensional space. I thought it dragged a teeny tiny bit. I feel like I have kind of mixed feelings about the ending of the book, because on the one hand I thought it was a very good ending, and I kind of get why the book is entitled Death's End. And it was interesting and it was very well done, but also the last 100 pages circa I felt were not the strongest in the book for me. Because while I did understand why we have this trap with the lowered light speed thing where Changxin and Guan Yifan are trapped like towards the end, I did get why that's there, but I also thought it was a shame that Changxin didn't get to meet Yun Tianmeng at the end. And yeah, also this whole thing where like the emotional side of the book is kind of more important towards the end. I didn't care very much for that. I thought it was interesting that the book didn't have a focus on like love and stuff, so I didn't care for that very much, so that was why I didn't love it. Although I did think the ending was very good, but just to say like, or I'm just trying to explain why it at the same time as it was very good also didn't knock me out of my socks, kind of. Also, now that I think about it, the thing where they built this small universe for Changxin and Guan Yifan at the end, the book kind of lost me there, gotta say. Because for almost everything that happens in terms of science fiction and physics and stuff, the book kind of tells you what theory this builds on and what theory is behind it, and it kind of tries to tell you that this builds on research, on actual research. So I thought that was super interesting. That was something that I loved about the book, and I felt that this kind of was missing from this whole, oh, by the way, now we have a tiny parallel universe for you. There you go. I kind of missed that there. So the book kind of lost me with that part. So that was also something that I thought was not my favorite part of the book. I think the series as a whole was super strong. I enjoyed reading it so much. I'm so happy that I read it. I would absolutely recommend reading it if you like sci-fi and if you for some reason have not read it yet. If you have very huge problems with kind of sexist underlying descriptions, then I don't know if I would recommend it. But for me, it was not something that took much away from the reading experience. Like in the second book, I was pretty annoyed by it, but I could overlook it because I still loved the book. The books were connected so well, I think, and they build on each other very well. I loved how every book had kind of a new level of crazy sci-fi. That was super intriguing, and yeah, I had a great time reading this. If you have read the series, let me know what you think, where you agree or maybe disagree with my opinions. I tried to kind of explain why I have the opinions that I have, but I would be very interested in knowing what you think about it, about the books. And yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope it wasn't too rambly and chaotic, and maybe I'll see you in the next one. Bye.